will be on our website soon, but if you would like the code today, you can reach out to me today. With that, I would like to introduce Dr. Steve Wrightout. We're excited to have him here today. He's a professor of plant pathology in Virginia Tech School of Plant and Environmental Sciences. Steve was born on a family farm in Dinwiddie County and is an alum of NC State, Virginia Tech, and the University of Georgia. He started his tenure with Virginia Tech in 2005 at the Eastern Shore Ag Research and Education Center. He served as the director there before relocating to Blacksburg in July of last year. Since 2005, Steve has served as the Commonwealth's Research and Extension Vegetable Plant Pathologist, focusing on all aspects of plant disease management. And in 2018, Steve received a Distinguished Service Award from the Association of Virginia Potato and Vegetable Growers. Thank you, Steve. We'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Lindsay, for the introduction. I appreciate everybody coming today. Beautiful day with bad stuff coming our way. So, you know, it's great to make time for me. I really appreciate it. And for those of us that'll be joining in and listening later, that's great too. And I wanted to start by saying that if I don't talk about, you know, something today that's near and dear to your heart, it's not because it's not important or I can't help you. All you need to do is contact me. I've got my email and my cell phone number up there. Feel free to reach out if you have questions about what I talk about, or you have questions about what I don't talk about, because a lot of times that may be the case as well. 90 minutes is a good amount of time, but it still can't cover everything probably within that time period. So first, I want to talk about the disease triangle. And when you take plant pathology, intro to plant pathology, within the first 2 to 3 lectures, you find this wonderful thing called a plant disease triangle. And it's very simplistic, but what you really learn later on is the impact of it and all the manipulations that you can do to help break plant disease occurrence. So the triangle, as defined by pathologists, is basically you have to have a susceptible host, you have to have favorable environmental conditions, and you have to have a pathogen there. So when all 3 of these things are come together properly, that's when plant disease occurs. Our goal as plant pathologists and as growers and industry personnel is to break this triangle, to manipulate one of these lines or one of these items so that we have maybe a resistant host, or we do something that makes conditions unfavorable for disease, or we exclude ourselves from the pathogen. So some of these are easy to do, some of these are really difficult to do, some of them I can't tell you how to do yet. So anyway, there's just so many different cases that you get into, and that's where I was talking about before. If you have specific questions, let me know. In general, and this goes back the 15 years that I've been the vegetable plant pathologist for Virginia, about 60% of the problems that are due to pathogens are fungi in Virginia, in vegetables. And then we have bacteria, which was like 21%, viruses, which was 20%, and nematodes, which was 19%. So basically you end up with fungi being the predominant problem, and then bacteria, viruses, and nematodes all being pretty equally there for second place. Now, that doesn't mean that you can ignore bacteria, viruses, or nematodes. It just means that they're less prevalent or less identified as a problem. There is one version of my intro to Plant Path talk, where I actually talk about the top 11 vegetable diseases in the state of Virginia. And I'm not going to do that today. That generally takes about 3 hours for me to do. So it's something that if you're interested in, for a certain group, I'm happy to do. But these are the top 11. We'll touch upon most of these today as examples of plant disease management principles. So a lot of these we will be talking about. But regardless, this is a list to kind of know and become familiar with if you're growing vegetables in the state. Okay, so with that being said, we'll start on our plant disease principles. I kind of view it as there are three major categories. You have cultural and biological control practices. You have plant resistance, and then finally you have chemical plant disease control. Most successful program really includes a part of all these, or has a little bit of each of these components within it. So it's entomologists generally use the term integrated pest management, and pathology applies to pathology as well. Best programs are a multi-pronged approach. So starting with cultural practices that can help, crop rotation. And, in Virginia, we really, I kind of view the soil-borne pathogens as really problematic for us. We don't have infinite land to utilize in a lot of cases, particularly in our high-value crops and high-value locations. So, crop rotation is really important. It's really effective at managing these soil-borne fungi, bacteria, and nematodes. So, rotating to a non-host or going fallow or cover crop, while this may not be always economically feasible, it's really important. And even if you're doing a garden in your backyard, it's really important not to plant, tomatoes in the same area year after year. If you have some flexibility, it's great to move them around. And you also have to know your plant families. Knowing that, which are Cucurbitaceae, which ones are solanaceous crops. That helps with your rotations as well, rotating your families. And then there are cover crops. Cover crops are really, really gaining in traction. Everybody is really interested in cover crops. I think it's fantastic. It's great for soil conservation, and it can have a varying impact on plant disease. When managed right, you can have a positive impact and reduce and eliminate some diseases even. But when not managed properly or done incorrectly, you may actually increase diseases. So a lot of the research, and it's really a hot area right now, it's fairly sporadic. There's some contradictory things out there as well. And it is almost site specific a lot of times. And pathogens specific as well. So I'm going to go through some of the more common cover crop options that are out there and talk a little bit about their usage and some of the conceptions, some of the practices to help you from really developing an issue. So first of all, they're brassicas. Brassicas are commonly seen as a green biofumigant disease suppressing cover crop. And I can't argue with that at all. They are. However, it's very important with brassicas to utilize them properly. So you want to plant them in the fall, flail mow them in the spring, or you can actually, there's some flexibility of timing, but generally they're planted in the fall. You have biomass growth over the winter into the spring, and you flail mow them and incorporate them into the soil. This is the method where you get the most out of your brassica. So brassicas produce isothiocyanates. And this is the same metabolite that is produced by the fumigant metamsodium. It's just natural. So basically, the more biomass you have, the more ITC production you have. Now, the caveat is certain brassicas really vary in the amount of ITC production that they are for. Something like Caliente, which you can actually purchase as a green biofumigant, is bred for a green biofumigant, has been produced to maximize ITC production. Calientes and arugula. If you haven't tried to eat that, I will save you the heartburn of trying to eat that arugula. Caliente is not very tasty. But regardless, it's very broad spectrum. Brassicas can be broad spectrum. Again, the ITC has impacts on nematodes, soil-borne diseases. Soil-borne diseases, just a few pictures. Pythium, Rhizoctonia. This is a fusarium problem in this tomato field, and this is southern blight. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those later. I wanted to just to enforce the need for breaking the cells. If you have brassica plant cells that remain unbroken, you do not have ITC production, and this is your active ingredient. So you've got to break that cell. And again, you can do that by using something like a rototiller. Rototiller is a great thing to run across these because you're breaking the tissue and you're also incorporating it. ITCs are volatile. So if you just go out and bush hog the field, those ITCs will remain on the surface, and then you'll have volatilization and have a minimal impact. Just a few more cover crops that are commonly utilized in Virginia. Number of vetch and legumes that are used. The only issue I have with vetch and legumes are nematodes. If you plant vetch and legumes during warmer periods, say late summer, early fall, you can actually get some degree of reproduction of root knot nematodes on vetches. They really like this. There's a root knot nematode resistant vetch, Cahaba white, and we've looked at that a little bit. I would caution it's not the best sometimes in terms of stand production. We may be kind of on the northern realm of where that can survive really well. Sun hemp is a great summer option. It's got nematode and certain disease resistance, and you can plant that out. Rye and wheat, if you're producing a lot of non-gramineous plants during the summer months, rye and wheat make terrific covers because there are very few pathogens of rye and wheat that are, will go to some of the other vegetables. And again, this is a really hot area. We're learning more every day. It seems like I can find a new article on cover crop and the impact on disease. So lots to learn, lots to come in the next decade or so, and helping to understand some of these items. Okay. So the next thing that we want to talk about is sanitation. And with sanitation, I always kind of feel like there are two types. You have a pre-introduction and post-introduction. A pre-introduction is basically keeping something out of your farm, keeping a certain pathogen away from your farm. Post-introduction is keeping, okay, oops, here it is. How do I keep this minimalized, or how do I keep it from spreading to other parts of my production area? So with sanitation, I think it's important to buy certified seed. We're going to talk a little bit more about some sanitation practices on seed. The more reputable your seed source is, the better or less of a chance you have of bringing in some sort of pathogen. If you purchase new equipment, particularly from You know, I always say from the South, just because they're more pathogens. Pathogens tend to overwinter on equipment more down there. It's not that I'm you know, banging on the South, but if you get new equipment from anywhere, really, you need to disinfect it. At least power wash it, you know, or something like that. Something to remove any sort of soil that may be carrying pathogens from another area. If a disease is present within a certain area, always work that area last. So let's say you get one certain field or one certain area, and you know you've got root knot nematode in there, and you're doing your best to manage it, and you're just happy that it's not on another part of the farm. Work that other, if you're going to go across and let's say you're going to cultivate your entire farm, work that field with root knot last, and of course then clean off your equipment at the end. Don't go into that area first and then drag it across the rest of your farm, because you can get spread that way. Okay, so again, what I wanted to do is to kind of give you some examples of some of these principles that we talk about, and kind of intermingle them around the principles. That way, I'm just not sitting here, you know, talking principles. I think it's more entertaining to do this. So hot water seed treatment is a great method for sanitation, particularly in an organic setting, because the seeds are going to come non-treated. So you have no treatment on the seed that you're worried about washing off or causing any sort of problem with. And it's an effective way at eliminating and reducing seedborne pathogens. The best reference that I have for these is from Rutgers. Rutgers has a great guideline on how to do hot water seed treatments to manage bacterial diseases. And we had a grant with them, oh gosh, probably about a decade ago, and did a couple of these workshops across the Commonwealth. It's fairly easy to do. What we utilized were some tea diffusers where you could put your seed in. Of course, you get some water infiltration, but your seeds aren't loose, so you don't have to go fish in the mouth. And then get some water baths. Of course, you know, it's fairly delicate what you're doing, so you want a good water bath. And you want a thermometer to go ahead and test and make sure that temperature is what it says it is, because we know electronic things break sometimes or don't read what it's supposed to. So you can probably pick up some of these, a few $100. You know, it would get you a pretty nice one. Actually, water baths are a really good pickup on places that do biological surplus. Biosurplus is a listserv that anybody really can get on and bid on equipment. So that's a great place to find some of this. And here are some recommendations for how long you have to treat certain seed, you know, at a certain temperature to help remove some of the both bacterial and fungal disease problems. So, you know, you can, I'm not going to go through each one of these singularly, but it kind of gives you an idea of some of the crops that this is useful on. Where we have seen it really be beneficial is on tomato for both bacterial canker and bacterial spot. And these are pathogens that are really, really difficult, and Pseudomonas bacterial speck as well. But these are really, really difficult to control, even in conventional settings. There are just not a lot of good answers for it. But you end up with, leaf infections, you get fruit infections, of course, making it less marketable. We don't like any pathogen that really infects our fruit, right? So, you know, and a lot of this starts in the greenhouse. You can actually get early on infections when your plants are in the greenhouse. And, you know, the heat seed treatment really helps a lot, particularly seed that's not treated. you know, or save seed. It may have some in there, and it really blows up in the greenhouse, and then you deal with it all year long. It's really unfortunate. Um, so that's something that you can do to certainly help out with that. I think okay. So we'll talk a little bit about inoculum reduction, and this is when you actually have a problem, and you really know you know it's there, and it's just trying to manage that population of pathogens. So you know you can't really get rid of it, but you can manage it and not let it blow up on you. And things like removing or burying crop residues. Don't let, let's say if you finish a crop of something in August, and we all are busy in the summertime, but go ahead and try to remove the crop residue, because again, you just allow for more generations of the pathogen to in that old crop material to multiply. Controlling weeds the best you can. Weeds harbor a lot of these pathogens, so it's really important to have a good weed control program. Steam and bleaching greenhouse, as with bacterial spot and tomato, a lot of things start in the greenhouse. If you're growing the greenhouse, it's even more paramount that you have good greenhouse sanitation. And then crop rotation. That's a method that can be placed under inoculum reduction. Some other techniques that works for certain pathogens, mulching. So on the screen we have two of the more more serious fungal diseases of tomato, Septoria leaf spot, and early blight. You know, I've seen these both cause severe problems in both conventional and organic tomatoes in the Commonwealth. In conventional systems, you know, you're using some sort of plastic mulching sometimes. In organic situations, I've seen a lot of things like straw being applied at the bottom as a mulch, or I've seen compost. I've seen wood chips, and those items are actually pretty good at reducing the amount of disease within the canopy. And the reasoning for that is Alternaria and Septoria, both of those fungal pathogens survive in the soil. So when you have a rainfall, if you have bare soil, that inoculum is splashed up onto the plant, and you get these infections. If you have like a compost or wood chips or something like that, the rainfall falls on wood chips and kind of just seeps down into the soil. You don't have that pathogen splashed up into the canopy, and therefore you don't really get disease quite like you would on conventional or bare ground. So it works for these two diseases. But that doesn't mean it works for everything. Southern blight, which we will talk about at the end of the talk a little bit more in detail. Actually, if you put out, let's say you have a southern blight problem, and you put out wood chips, southern blight's going to say thank you very much, and it'll serve as a bridge for it to infect other plants because it loves organic matter. So again, it's really important to know, you know, your pathogen and whether a certain approach will work on it or not. Actually, I've seen a certain location that did that with southern blight, where they put out wood chips and really created a much bigger problem by that. So you have to know your pathogen and what will work on it. One other item that I wanted to talk about in terms of inoculum reduction is a fairly new technique that we've just started looking at here in Virginia, and that's anaerobic soil disinfestation. And this is the process where you add a carbon source And the carbon sources that we've looked at include different cover crop residues, or we actually looked at pelletized poultry litter as well. But utilizing a carbon source, covering that with, incorporating the carbon source, covering with plastic or some sort of biodegradable mulch, and then watering the field to capacity for 2 to 3 weeks. So basically, what you do is you turn your soil anaerobic. As that soil goes anaerobic, a lot of your plant pathogens, insect pests, and even weeds have a hard time surviving. These sort of conditions. So in a way, it's very similar to a form of fumigation. You completely alter your microbial communities, and really take out a lot of your bad pathogens. So it works. This was actually our data from the Eastern Shore, and we didn't have a lot of disease problems where we put this trial at. Excuse me, but we were just loaded with nutsedge. This area had a lot of nutsedge in it, and we actually had a really good success at suppressing the nutsedge. Here's the control. So this is an aerobic control. So this didn't receive the water. Here's a non-aerobic control. So this is being saturated for 2 to 3 weeks. No carbon source other than the organic matter that was in the soil. And you can look at some of the other cover crop residues that we used. But you have saturation for 2 or 3 weeks, and we were seeing really big impact on nutsedge. And other people have seen this work for nematodes and other diseases. Again, it's something that we've just started working with here in Virginia, and are trying to fine tune for our conditions. Okay. So the next type of plant disease management principle we want to talk about is avoidance. And this is avoiding infested areas on your fields or in your farm, planting date or planting time, and irrigation management. So irrigating with pathogen-free water, avoiding overhead irrigation when possible, and avoiding over irrigation. I've got a couple of examples for avoidance. One involves cucurbit downy mildew. This is one of my top 11 diseases of vegetables. It infects all cucurbits, but it's really a big problem on cucumber. It can also do some damage on pumpkin as well. We don't have really good resistance out there. This pathogen can't overwinter in Virginia unless it has, help in a greenhouse. Fortunately, we've never had that problem before. But it overwinters in the deep south, places that have, cucurbit production year round. Sometimes in the Gulf of Mexico, along the coastal areas, South Texas, even into the Caribbean. That's where cucurbit downy mildew likes to spend its winters. So, and every year, as the weather starts warming up, we start getting weather out of the south. It moves up the coast, and we kind of keep an eye on where it moves. We'll talk about that in a second. But there are 5 different pathotypes of this pathogen, and all 5 pathotypes infect cucumber and cantaloupe. There's only one pathotype or 2 pathotypes that really affect watermelon. So again, it's really, cucumber, we always tend to see it first on cucumber. This is the average. We plant these things called sentinel plots, and they're basically planted to see when we see, cucurbit downy mildew develop. Then we can send out alerts to growers and extension agents saying, hey, cucurbit downy mildew is here. Manage in whichever manner you normally do. And we can see that cucumber, for average over those 14 years, average date of first detection was around the beginning of August. So as early, I think, as the first week of July, and generally by mid-August, we generally would see it, but right around the first week of August generally for cucumber. Squash as well, cantaloupes, acorn squash a little bit later. And look at pumpkin and watermelon. We don't see, on average, we don't see downy mildew on pumpkin and watermelon until September. Twice we never saw it on pumpkin, and 4 times we never saw it on watermelon. So a lot of difference there. Regardless, what it shows us is that, um, you know, by August 5th, you can figure on having downy mildew in cucumber. It is a really, really difficult disease to manage proactively or reactively, excuse me. So one of the things that I recommend for people that are growing cucumbers and have some flexibility in their market is to grow cucumber in the spring and just completely avoid this scourge of a disease. Because again, if you're growing pesticide-free or organic, it is almost impossible to manage this disease. Conventionally, I've seen people use conventional fungicides and not be able to manage it. So, if you're growing cucumbers for somebody that wants to make pickles, go ahead and put them out in the spring. Avoid this disease completely. Pumpkin, hard to do because we all kind of have a target date for pumpkin that is across the board. So anyway, that's that. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about irrigation and moisture management, and think of it more than just rainfall, because it's things like avoiding overseeding and overplanting. Because if you do that, you get a tighter canopy, you get more humidity within that canopy, and it has a big impact on certain diseases, as we'll see. Avoid over-fertilization. Again, with over-fertilization, you're just going to have a more lush growth. It's going to be more compact. It's going to be really tight. You're going to have more humidity in there and give more opportunities for disease. Particularly if disease is present, avoid over-irrigation. There's a lot of times people tend to just set a timer and walk away from it, and every day you get a certain amount of irrigation, regardless of what the weather does. So it's important to kind of take that into account and not over irrigate, and avoid planting in low-lying areas when possible. As my example for moisture management, I'm going to use late blight. Late blight is probably the most historic, or one of the most historic pathogens that are out there. It does a considerable amount of damage. It is one of these diseases that if you get it and the environment is proper, it is nearly impossible to control. We had a large outbreak of late blight in 2009 along the East Coast. That was our last truly huge late blight outbreak. We tend to see it in the Commonwealth every year in varying degrees of severity. Most concerned about it on tomato and potato. They are the two big hosts where it does a lot of damage. It's an obligate parasite. Phytophthora infestans is its name. It needs a host, much like downy mildew and cucurbits. It cannot overwinter here in the Mid-Atlantic. It needs natural movements, or can overwinter in transplants, greenhouses, etc. And talk about the disease triangle. This is an environmentally driven beast. It really is hard to deal with. What I want to share with you as a kind of a tale of two cities is a comparison between Elizabeth City, North Carolina, and Painter, Virginia in 2012. Of course, You know, both locations have a lot of tomatoes and potatoes in particular around them. Um, Sometime around the beginning of May in that year, uh, late blight was found in both locations on potato. So May 5th, uh, you know, late blight found, again, both are very agricultural areas, a lot of susceptible hosts around. And what happened over the next month in terms of plant disease development was interesting. In Painter in Virginia, fortunately, um, disease didn't really develop. It showed up, and for the most part, it remained minor. And I say that very fortunately. In Elizabeth City, it became a raging epidemic where it really, really caused a lot of damage, affected a lot of crops. And, you know, so retrospectively, you look back at it, and as a pathologist, you wonder, well, why was that? And here's the weather data that I pulled, you know, for Elizabeth City, North Carolina, and Painter, Virginia for that time period. The rainfall data was not all that much different. But where the difference really was in relative humidity, and it was pretty minor. Only a 4% relative humidity difference. So there was 4% more relative humidity in Elizabeth City than it was in Painter. And that was probably enough to drive late blight to be an epidemic in Elizabeth City, but yet in Painter it was not. So again, very subtle, very small changes in relative humidity can have a big impact on certain diseases. And that's very much worth remembering when you're considering planning and stuff like that, planning, you know, densities of fertilization. Just keep in mind, you don't want a really, really bushy, high humidity type canopy. Um, Similarly, moisture management is really important for seedling damping off. You know, most two common diseases we deal with here are not Phytophthora, excuse me, Pythium and Rhizoctonia. So we can see this in greenhouse settings. We can start in the greenhouse and go to the field and get worse. We can have seed that doesn't come up because it rots in the ground. We can have seed that comes up and, you know, the fungus takes it away. So again, with damping off, it is very important to realize that a lot of it's driven by moist soils. So, you know, always keep that in mind that if you have excessive rainfall, you know, just a lot of water, even water standing on the ground, that is not a good time to plant because you really have the conditions, and this goes for grains as well. You don't want to plant when it's really, really wet. Now, I understand there are times when you say, okay, you know, I need to plant my wheat. It's, you know, mid-November. I understand you have to do what you have to do. But in a perfect world, you know, you want to plant when it's not completely saturated or a lot of water there. Okay. So next, we'll talk a little bit about biological control. And this is something that there is a lot of research that needs to be done on this front. You know, one of the things that I look forward to about things, you know, you know, for the future is just being here in Blacksburg and hopefully looking at a lot more. You know, I would say there are a lot more farms that are organic and utilize biological control nearby. So I'm looking forward to being able to evaluate some of these materials. Some of them I have, and I found that some work and some don't. Again, it's very specific. Some are more of commitments where, you know, it's not just one application, I'm done. Does it work or not? No, it's more of a commitment to build up a biological or suppressive population, and that takes time. And unfortunately, a lot of times companies do a poor job of saying, um, you need to do this over time to see how it works. So again, always follow the label. You assume that they've done the research to figure out exactly how it works. There are recommendation guides. I know our commercial vegetable production guide. We do have some biological materials that we recommend that we've seen work. So again, it's there. But you can always ask me as well, or your extension agent. They can get in touch with me. But there's a wide range of things there. Okay. Next, I want to go to probably the easiest method of plant disease control, and that's using resistant cultivars. Got a lot of examples here for you on this. Really, it's really the most effective control for viral diseases because we don't have virucides. Sometimes you can get cultivars that are resistant to a specific disease. Sometimes you can get cultivars that are resistant to several. But just because something says it's disease resistance doesn't mean it's going to pick up all of them. The advantages of it is, you can just basically go from having disease be a problem to not, to where it's just complete total resistance. You don't have to worry about pesticides in some instances. And in most cases, you don't need to alter your planting equipment or your plans. All you have to do is just purchase different seed. It's very environmental and antagonistic friendly as well. Disadvantages, seed can be expensive and hard to find sometimes. Particularly lately, there's been a lot of interest in gardening, and the last couple of years since COVID, seed's been a little bit harder to find. The resistance may only last to a certain level, and then it may be overcome. So it may not be completely resistant. We call those tolerant cultivars generally. And sometimes you may get a little bit of what we call a yield drag from the resistant cultivars. And that's generally due to traditional breeding practices where you have incorporated wild genetic package into a plant, and you end up with things like smaller fruit. A good example of this would be bacterial wilt of tomato. Some of the resistant cultivars to that disease actually tend to produce smaller fruit. They're a little bit softer. So, it may not be the fruit that you're used to or necessarily want, but it's better than nothing in a lot of cases. So, the first example I want to give on this is basal downy mildew. And this is a disease that was introduced to the United States in 2004. It is really a scourge of basil. And I'll tell you how impactful it's been to the Commonwealth. Back in like 2007 was when I first put together, the top 10 disease list. This was number 11. It forced me to make a top 11. So that's how important it was. Basil, of course, is a very sought after herb. Back before downy mildew, you really could produce a lot of basil with little cost. Unfortunately, downy mildew came in. It's been really a big problem. And you can see the symptomology of it on the screen. Topside leaf doesn't look terrible. You get some yellowing. Turn it over and you see the mildew. Again, with basil, we're eating the leaves, so it's very important that they're more pristine than this. So one of the great success stories that I ever saw was the breeding program at Rutgers. It's a very important crop to New Jersey. They had a basil breeding program in place, and they were able to relatively quickly develop some resistant varieties. We actually looked at these in Virginia for a couple of years, just ensuring that they would work in different locations. The 4 varieties that they produce are now available: Passion, Devotion, Obsession, and Thunderstruck. I often tell people, if you get a basil cultivar that sounds like a men's cologne, you've done your job and you've got something that's probably basil downy mildew, resistant. A couple other resistant cultivars out there that are at least are marketed as such are Everleaf and Prospera. And then, well, I'll show you some data from one of our basil downy mildew trials. And here's your standard sweet basil Genovese. You've got about 55% disease incidence or non-marketable. Everleaf, which was supposed to be resistant, turned out for us at least not to be. So we kind of felt like, well, that's not very good. Eleonora, that one has been around for a while and it's a little bit more tolerant to downy mildew. For the longest time, Eleonora was the best we had. But wow, look at Devotion, Obsession, Passion, Thunderstruck. You got little disease, if any. And then Prospera also was very good. So again, really, really bad disease. You can get a resistant variety and pretty much take it away. Same can be said for tomato spotted wilt virus. If you're watching me from east of Interstate 95, you probably have seen this disease on pepper and tomato. It's a bad disease. It's been around since the 90s, roughly. And it can be a big problem. It's vectored by thrips. And there are many faces of tomato spotted wilt virus. Here you can see it on tomato, crinkling of the plant, some purpling here. This virus can kill the plant. We have green tomatoes that have these black splotches. Sometimes you don't see viral infection until the fruits ripen, and then you have these wild ring spot lesions. Peppers, you can see mottling and just again, not very marketable fruit, not what you would want to have. So a number of years, this was a big problem. We did some research trials back in the late 2000s at several different locations, looking at different rounds and aromas. And this just gives you an idea. I'm not going to go through one by one these varieties, but the tomato spotted wilt virus resistance is very good. You can see Florida 47 here, and we had 40 some percent infection of these plants. This is a non-resistant variety. All these other ones resistant. And you can see very, very little tomato spotted wilt, if any. So that is something that is very effective. Another resistance that's really effective. Some of the early tomato spotted wilt resistant tomatoes, such as Amelia, that was one of the first. There were a lot of complaints about fruit size. And I wanted to throw this in here just because Krista was one of the later generations, and we had other ones come since then, but they definitely have improved the fruit size with Krista and some of the ones that have come since. So, some of that yield drag is not as apparent as used to be. We did some trials with peppers as well, and found, like for Bell, Heritage was a really good tomato spotted wilt resistant variety for bells. And this variety, Boris, for if you like a sweet yellow banana pepper, fantastic. Had tomato spotted wilt variety and it just produced. There was no yield drag on this one. It was really good. So just some thoughts there. And my final resistant variety, and this one, I've considered putting broccoli and Brassica alternaria disease as my 12th on my top 11. And maybe I'll do that, for upcoming years. This has really become a problem in broccoli in the Commonwealth. It starts out as these little target spot looking lesions. And then the fungus kind of hangs around and gets in broccoli heads and causes some real problems because, of course, nobody really wants this. One of the things about this is, or one of the problems is fungicide resistance. And the other problem is getting materials into that head. Broccoli is really difficult in terms of managing with pesticides, whether it be organic or conventional, because it's really hard to get adherence to that waxy cuticle. It's really hard to get materials inside that head as well. One of the things that we've been looking at is utilizing different different pathogen or different varieties to see if there are any differences. And here you can see with Castle Dome and Green Magic, we had a lot of disease, 95, 75% disease with these. Emerald Crown, which gets planted on a lot of acreage in the Mid-Atlantic, about half disease. But look at Imperial. Imperial had 11%, 11.3% disease. So again, variety making a huge difference. Similar to varietal resistance is grafting, and this is a great new technique. Grafted plants get cheaper and cheaper every year. If you are a do-it-yourself person, grafting is a phenomenal thing to get involved with. It's just a really good way to deal with some really difficult pathogens such as southern blight, bacterial wilt, and nematodes, root knot nematodes. So generally it's available solanaceous cucurbits, mostly in the vegetable world. You want to be really careful on doing your research and making sure that you get a rootstock that suits your situation. Like, for example, if you have nematode problems, just double check and make sure that rootstock has that resistance, because while there's some rootstocks that are really effective on a lot of different things, just make sure you get the one specific for your needs. And I won't show a lot of data because the picture is worth 1,000 words on this. These are some tomato trials that we did looking at grafted tomatoes. And this is a field that had just been obliterated with bacterial wilt the year prior. And this is a conventional field, but again, it gives you an idea of how it would just work in any setting. Here's the grower portion of the field, and you can see most plants are dead. Maybe a touch of green over here, but for the most part, dead. This little area here was a research trial where we were looking at grafted plants. Basically, anything that you see green and surviving, those are grafted plants. So it works. And then this is a severe, infestation. We called this the lava field. So, you really can get it to work and times when you really can't get anything else to do the trick. Okay. So the last part that I want to talk about is chemical control. And, we have two types. You have general use, restricted use, pesticides. Make sure you have your license, etc. If you're growing organic, be sure to utilize OMRI approved materials. Remember, as always, the label is the law. Okay, so for fungicides, there are two main types. We have systemic, which penetrate and spread throughout the plant. And then we have protectants that do not penetrate plant tissue but it's generally adhered to the plant. So with systemic pesticides, you can spray them. You get plant uptake. It protects new growth. It's not as susceptible to environmental conditions and degradation. Protectants are. So if you have new growth, they're not going to be protected. If you have a heavy rainfall, chances are you could have the material flushed off the plant. And I say this because generally most of our organic or softer materials are protectants. So just keep that in mind. I did want to show you some data looking at some organic trials. I've probably done, I don't know, 20, 30 different organic assessments in my time here at Virginia Tech. And there are some things where we can get some efficacy. Powdery mildew of squash is one of those. This was a trial from 2011. And our NTC, that means non-treated control. So we had about 50% disease, so 50% of the leaves with powdery mildew. And you can see MP, which is an oil, and actually will offer some insect control. I don't know if Tom talked about that last week, but MP is actually effective on powdery mildew as well. So you get some benefit there. Microthiol, this is a sulfur material. A lot of people, a lot of pumpkin growers, even conventional pumpkin growers will use sulfur to help control powdery mildew. It works. Nordox is a copper material. People ask if you're an organic producer and you had one material, what would that be? I would say have a copper, because copper will help a little bit on fungal diseases as well as your bacterial diseases. So it's more the most broad spectrum organic material in my opinion. Serenade and Regalia, these are more biologicals, but you can see that they worked on powdery mildew and not so much with oxidate. I am not a huge fan of utilizing oxidate in the field for infield sprays. Is great if you want to sterilize equipment in the greenhouse, but under field conditions, I don't feel great about utilizing that. It just doesn't generally give me great results. This is another organic screen. This is on downy mildew, so a little different pathogen. This is on pumpkin. What I just wanted to point out, the black bar here, this is microthiol, this is sulfur. The gray bar here is champ, this is copper. The blue bar here is actually actinovate, which, generally we see some degree of protection with actinovate for certain diseases. I've seen it fail as well. So not quite as reliable as the copper and the sulfur, but certainly it has its place sometimes. Here's oxidate again, another again not working there either. So and the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of pesticide application, and this applies to conventional or organic, is basically curative versus a preventative fungicide. So preventative fungicide applications occur either before you have infection or directly after. Curative applications occur when you go out and say, oh my gosh, I've got a big problem, I've got to get on it. And generally preventative applications work so much better than curative. I kind of equate it to, with a preventative fungicide application, you're jumping on the treadmill at 1 mile an hour. Yeah, you can probably pull that off. Curative fungicide applications, look at this rate of disease increase. That's like jumping on the treadmill at 8 miles an hour. I don't even think I can run 8 miles an hour. But regardless, it's really important that you want to be, preventative versus curative on not only fungicides, but bactericides as well, which is a great lead in for bactericides. There are really three main types of bactericides. There are not enough of them, I can tell you that. I wish I had more options for growers, both organic and conventional. Protectants, again, do not penetrate the plant tissue. Copper and sulfur are examples of that. Copper is the better bactericide than sulfur. Antibodies really don't exist much anymore. There's been quite the phase out of them. There are a few that are still out there. They're effective. You can have resistance problems. And then there's systemic acquired resistance materials such as Acticar. Those are conventional products, mostly that basically elicit a response from the plant. It's kind of like getting the vaccine. Finally, nematicides, and for this group, wow, these are generally restricted use materials. Traditionally, they've been fairly toxic. Again, we're dealing with a lot of nervous system targeting. They can be solidiflod, fumigants, liquids. A lot of the old nematicides have been phased out and aren't on the market anymore. We don't have a lot of nematicides at all. This has kind of led to a little bit of a increase in nematode damage. You can also look at some of the warmer winters we've had recently. You tend to get more overwintering. For whatever reason, we're dealing with more root knot nematode than ever before. I wanted to show very subtle nematode damage. This is actually a snap bean field, so on the eastern shore. I was called out to it. There were a couple of these little spots here where you had poor growth, and your initial reaction would be, well, maybe water stood there or something like that. No, you pull the plants up and you see this. A lot of galling roots are really nasty looking. This is root knot nematode damage. Keep your eye on it. Learn to kind of ID this, even in gardening settings. One of the houses that I owned previously, I inherited a garden, which I was really excited about until I planted some tomatoes, and they were heirloom tomatoes. They had no nematode resistance, and I ended up getting some really ugly roots, and they never grew right. I guess it's revenge against the plant pathologist. But regardless, you can see nematodes anywhere. It doesn't have to be a big commercial field. And that's why, it's really important to rotate. For vegetables, there is some root knot resistance out there. It's pretty widespread in tomatoes, southern pea, sweet potato, and llama and snap. There are a couple of varieties: Demagreen, Alabama #1, English pea, Wando, pimento pepper, Mississippi, and Nemaheart. Bell pepper, a couple of varieties as well: Carolina Wonder, Charleston Bell. Again, I will remind you about the grafting. That is another thing you can do to manage your root knot problems. Okay, so what's really, really important on nematode control, and a lot of studies have shown this. Don't be alarmed if you get to the end of the year and you've had a great year and really good crops, and you pull up some plants and you see some galling. That's not generally when you have problems. When you really have problems is when you get this galling early on. So this is, your normal looking root system, looks great, taking up water, taking up nutrients, life is good. And then you get this little seedling here that just got annihilated by root knot nematode. You can tell your efficiency of uptake of nutrients and water is just not the same. Your anchoring, it's just not going to be good. So these first 6 to 8 weeks are really, really important with nematodes. So that's one thing that I like to tell people, be cognizant of. You're never going to eliminate or completely avoid nematodes, particularly if you have them. But what you learn to do is manage them. Viricides, well, we really don't have any sort of thing. It's important to use uh, plants that are resistant. We talked about tomato spotted wilt. Some viruses we do not have, resistance to. What you see below is actually a pumpkin plant, and it has a virus. I can't tell you exactly which one. We get mainly four different ones in Virginia. And what it is really academic, because we don't have resistance. Usually it's not worth the $60-$80 to figure out exactly which virus we're dealing with. But these are generally vectored, um, by aphids. So your approach would be to manage your vector. So if you keep your aphid populations in check, you won't have, the virus that's vectored through your pumpkins. Okay, so with that, we're wrapping up here pretty quickly. There are a couple of all points bulletins that I'd like to issue, particularly for organic farms, sustainable pesticide-free farms, because these are pathogens that really, there's certain pathogens that I see and I'm like, okay, well, we can come up with some ideas. We can manage this. I'm not too concerned about it. These are ones that if you have, we really need to talk. And these are threats to your sustainability. These are bad dudes. So southern blight is one. This is a fungal pathogen. We mentioned it briefly a couple of times, but it is on the uptick in Virginia. Again, it's much like nematodes, probably due to lack of fumigation, milder winters. We certainly have had a lot of moisture as a subtropical pathogen. We are the transition state when it comes to southern blight. The closer to the southeast part of the state you are, the more southern blight you see. I used to say it's virtually non-existent in like the Shenandoah Valley, but that's not true. In the last couple of years, we've seen it in the valley. It's been found in West Virginia. It's been found in Pennsylvania, New Jersey. So it is on the increase. Be on the lookout for it. It is a bad pathogen. Has a very big host range. Now, fortunately for the grain people in the crowd, this is good news. It really doesn't impact grains. But if you grow anything that is not a gramineous crop, southern blight can be a problem. If you grow pumpkins, and pumpkins are near and dear to your heart, this is another disease that we are trying to get an understanding of, and that's Plectosporium blight. So Plectosporium blight, I love the Todd background on this one. This was one of my summer employees that took the picture. But anyway, Plectosporium blight produces these little small tan spots on the fruit. You see poor maturation here. You'll see greening around the stem, around the shoulders. Another place where it really bangs you up is this handle. Customers really like a good handle for pumpkins, and it really can tear your handle up as well. That's another one. If pumpkins are near and dear to what you do and to your pocketbook, Plectosporium blight is a bad deal to deal with, and I can help you with it, but we need to start managing it pretty quickly. Finally, the last APB that I want to put out is basically tomato brown reverse fruit virus. This is a virus that is very, very new to America. We'll go back to the pictures. It was first found in the country of Jordan in 2015. Now it's in Greece, Israel, Italy, Netherlands, UK, tomato, Spain, China, and most importantly, it's pretty distributed throughout Mexico now. It has come to the United States a couple of times. It's been all in greenhouses so far, which is really good because if it comes into a greenhouse, you can eradicate it. You can basically take out all the plant material, destroy it, shut the doors, turn the heat up, and get to 160 degrees, and you denature it. So that's an eradication, that's happened a couple of times with it, and it's effective. Where it gets worrisome is when you get fruit that's imported into the United States that ends up in like a grocery store in Florida, which, that spread can happen. Transmission, this is an interesting virus in that it can be seed-borne or contact. So in other words, I could go touch the tomato that's infected at the grocery store, and then maybe I'm a tomato farmer or something, I go out and touch my tomatoes, and voila, I've infected, tomatoes with this nasty virus. Going back, looking at the pictures, you can see uneven maturation in tomato, some really wild, almost tomato spotted wilt looking symptomology in pepper. You have some mottling, yellowing, and this can actually, much like tomato spotted wilt, it can kill your plants. A lot of viruses don't kill, this one can. So what to do, be on the lookout for it. If you have tomatoes, make sure you use certified seed. Be cognizant of the countries I mentioned where it is, but make sure that seed's certified. If you see something that looks wild or weird, please contact either your agent, me. VDEX is also monitoring, so they likely would be a good source as well. And any sort of update, and hopefully I don't have to do this, but if we ever find it in Virginia, of course, that would be relayed to everybody through media and through your extension agent. So again, just something that's out there and something to keep an eye on. Oops, let me go back. So with that, that is all I have. Again, feel free to call or email me, get in touch with the agent. They can get in touch with me as well. I have a Facebook page. We've had that for approximately a decade now, and there are just a slew of pictures on there showcasing different plant diseases. For those of you that are with the Common Grain Alliance, I haven't spent 15 years on the Eastern Shore. I worked a lot with barley, wheat. There are a lot of pictures on there of diseases and that on those crops as well. So there's just a lot of information. You can find even pictures of me when I had hair. That's how long we've actually had it. So with that poor joke, I will stop my presentation, stop sharing, and I see we have a bunch of questions or chats at least. So let's try to see what we have. I'm going to take a drink of water. Okay, so we have a couple of questions. One, was the listserv mentioned during the presentation? Ruth, I'm trying to remember where that was, and feel free to chime in which listserv you might be talking about.
Steve, I think it was biosurplus or something similar. It was at the beginning.
Oh, okay, yeah. So biosurplus is just it's just basically a website. So I would just Google biosurplus and see what you can come up with. It's like biosurplus supply or something like that. That's just one of these places where you can find, use something like a water bath that would work. So, okay, Jeff, you have a question about controlling powdery mildew with wood vinegar. First, I'll ask you which crop you might be talking about. Okay, so any crop. So basically, Jeff, I think I've not tested wood vinegar. I can do some research for you. I'm sure find some results for you from some of my colleagues that have. I've not tested it. I will tell you this: powdery mildew. Again, I was talking a little bit about like southern blight. I don't lose sleep over powdery mildew because there are a number of things that actually can offer some suppression. So it's very, I would think most vinegars would have some degree of suppression of powdery mildew just because of the, acidity there. So I would think it would have some suppressive ability or, attributes. I would be a little bit concerned with, some crop phytotoxicity. So you might want to be careful with that. So, okay, so Bill, you asked about fire blight. So fire blight is one that, as a pathologist, you certainly learn about it. But I'm not the fire blight expert because I don't do tree fruits. So somebody in Winchester, we actually just hired a new pathologist at Winchester. And surgeon could certainly answer that question. My 2 cents, just being a pathologist and somebody, in agriculture, pruning is a great, first approach to fire blight. And then if you're looking at organic treatment, it's copper then. So you want to use something like that that's going to have, some abilities. That's a tough one though. Unlike powdery mildew, it really is a difficult one to manage. But somebody in Winchester could give you more information on that. So yes, and there's some biologicals out there as well, Dan. It's good stuff. Okay, I will move over to the chat and see what we have. Ruth, I think we got the listserv there. Okay, there's the wood vinegar. Yeah, the MP, the potassium fatty acid soap. Yes, so Dan was talking about the oxidate. So the term I like to use with oxidate is flash kill. And you basically create a biological vacuum when you use oxidate. So if and if you do put out I've heard of people putting out biologicals with oxidate too, and that's not a good practice. But if you flash kill using oxidate or a similar type material, you do want to make sure that if you're on a biological program to recolonize it. Okay.
Great. Well, if there's no other questions, I think we're just about at time anyway. So I think on behalf of, Common Grain Alliance and VABF, definitely want to thank you, Dr. Rideout, for, participating today and sharing all your knowledge. And for all those who are attending, if, there's pieces you want to dive deeper in, we'll be sending out the recording as well as Dr. Rideout's, email. I know it was in his presentation, but we'll make sure that goes out to everyone as well if there's further questions. So, thank you for your time, and thank you so much for participating.
Yeah, thank you to everybody, and everybody take care of yourselves, and have a good day. Get ready for the cold weather coming in, unfortunately.